Good evening. Tonight we'll be talking about human trafficking. Could it be happening in your area? Could people that you know be affected by this? And tonight we have our very special guests, Isaiah Floyd and Dan O'Brien from the Freedom Connection Against Human Trafficking. So we want to, just dive head first into this topic. Statistics show that around 2.4 million people around the world are forced into labor as a result of human trafficking. Which areas or regions of the world have the higher concentrations of human trafficking?
Well, within the context of the U.S., Florida, Texas, California they dominate in terms of human trafficking and its presence. Virginia is actually top 10 within the nation, or DMV, District of Columbia, Maryland, and Virginia. That region or area concentrates heavily. And then outside of the United States, you have a huge presence of human trafficking and forced labor and sex trafficking within the areas of Asia, Europe, those nations.
Okay. Considering where we are in the DMV, I found it very surprising that, Northern Virginia, a very plush area, has such a high rate of human trafficking, being, one of the top 10 in the nation. Has this always been a problem here, or has it been recently due to gang involvement in the region, or what has caused it?
I mean, I'd say that human trafficking has been a problem within the United States and probably within Northern Virginia for a while, but it's only now starting to get the attention that it really deserves to get.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, some statistics about human trafficking just in general. About 80% of all human trafficking victims are women and young girls. About 80% of all trafficking victims are sex trafficking victims. And there has been a very big boom in sex trafficking within Northern Virginia and the Washington, D.C., the whole Nova area.
Mm-hmm. So are gangs involved in sex trafficking in this area?
They certainly play a huge role in the perpetuation of human trafficking. You start to look at their different modes and operations. A lot of times gangs hold skip parties. And at these parties, there's a lot of drugs, there's a lot of alcohol. So the skip parties work in this way. Girls typically will go to school on the bus. They'll get off the bus, and prior to entering into the school building, they'll go down the street and meet up with a gang member. This gang member then takes this young girl to what is known as a skip party. Here, they're exposed to a lot of sex, drugs, alcohol, and this is primarily the location where the sex trafficking occurs.
They call these skip parties.
Skip parties, yes.
That's a really funny name.
Yeah, it's crazy. And so at these parties, girls are offered drugs, and in return, they're expected to provide sexual favors for the males that attend. And then, so for instance, the trafficker will then say, look, I'll give you whatever, and in return, you provide a sexual favor for my friend. But what really happens is the trafficker is paid a certain amount of money, and in return, this girl is expected to provide.
So what's the average age of these girls? Are they middle school girls, high school girls? What's the age group?
The typical age group for somebody that will become a sex trafficking victim is usually between the ages of 12 and 14, which is shockingly young. And statistics have shown that the age of those that are becoming sex trafficking victims, the age is getting lower and lower, which is very frightening.
Mm-hmm.
And another thing to take into account is the fact that 12 to 14 is a very delicate age, especially for females. They're dealing with a lot of hormonal, fluctuation. Maybe perhaps they're feeling, vulnerable. Maybe someone at home is devaluing them. So domestic issues, and this all plays a part into the whole aspects of human trafficking. You have a trafficker who identifies a young girl who's 12 to 14 as being vulnerable. She looks sad. She looks down and depressed. Perhaps she just recently broke up with her boyfriend, or she had an argument with her father or mother. So there's issues there that exist and play a part also.
So recently it's been predicted that in the US, this is a $32 billion industry, like more than the revenue that McDonald's made in 2013. Do people understand the size of sex trafficking?
I believe that they don't. I think that human trafficking to most people is something that is seen as something that happens not within the United States, and it's something that they can't control. There are many different aspects to human trafficking. There is sex trafficking and labor trafficking, but there are many other areas such as organ trafficking, in which people will be coerced into selling their organs, like their kidneys and such, in foreign nations, and those organs will be shipped through the black market into the United States, and they'll be used in emergency rooms that are unsure of where those kidneys and those organs have come from.
So organ trafficking isn't really big in the United States. It's more of an international issue.
Organ trafficking proves to be more prominent in areas that don't have adequate medical resources, but it also it exists in the United States. You have sometimes where someone who needs money, perhaps their child is sick, or they have to pay for some sort of bill, or they have an expense, and they're like, wow, I need X amount of dollars. What can I do to get this money? A lot of times they don't have jobs. They don't have the adequate resources around them to get money. So they're like, let me donate this organ, which sounds crazy, but it exists. But as I said before, it's more prominent outside of the United States, especially in like Asia, Philippines, Japan, Thailand, areas like that.
Okay. So, well, now like that's a good introduction to human trafficking, but let's get down to the wire now. So what kind of different platforms do these, pimps use? Do they use online platforms? Is it, word of mouth? How does this occur?
I mean, with pimps, it's definitely a possibility for them to use word of mouth, but something that's really boomed over I'd say the past decade or so has been human trafficking that's been involved with the internet. You'll have people that will get nude pictures of young women and or men, and they will use that as blackmail, and that's a way that people will get coerced into being trafficked as sex trafficking victims. There's been a huge boom in this, and it's very difficult to fight online human trafficking. It's a very new thing, and people are still police forces are still adjusting to learning how to fight to combat it.
So what kind of laws do they have, speaking of police, what kind of laws do they have against human trafficking?
With human trafficking, it varies state to state. I mean, I'm sure that there are federal laws, but Virginia itself does not have many laws that deal with human trafficking. If I remember correctly, there is no law that protects the victims of human trafficking. So if they're a sex victim, they might be tried for having sex underage, and that is definitely a reason why a lot of people that were trafficked will not come out to the justice system, since they might be prosecuted. But yeah, Virginia overall does not have a lot of states that does not have a lot of laws that combat human trafficking.
And additionally, on the context of Virginia and its efforts to combat human trafficking, recent legislation has been attempted to be passed, which states that we're trying to define human trafficking. What is human trafficking? And with this definition, we can attach it to other crimes. So I'm not sure if you understand how, like, if you attach human trafficking to rape, you can potentially get an additional 15 years. That's just a hypothetical scenario. Mm-hmm. So by defining it, you can increase punitive measures as well.
Okay. Isaiah, you were telling me before about the man that got caught in Lorton, Virginia. What kind of numbers are we speaking? What kind of revenue did he make from this human trafficking?
Upwards of $1 million.
This is in our area.
Yes, Lorton is very, very close, and it's very profitable, unfortunately, and a lot of people have identified its profits, and that's why it's so critical that task force within the Northern Virginia area, such as ASK, which is Ask Me, which is it's prevention program, which has been introduced within the past year to kind of raise awareness and to kind of have your community on the lookout of what's going on. Identifying these suspective characters who live in your neighborhood who potentially could be dealing in, human trafficking and sexual crimes.
Those are obviously great efforts to, combat this issue. Speaking of, identifying this problem, what are some of the warning signs, someone might display that they're a victim of human trafficking?
Some warning signs might include if, and these warning signs are very evident in very young girls and boys, if they happen to be very reserved, if they're, besides being reserved, if they look like they've been, I don't want to say beaten up, but if they've been physically abused, if they don't make a lot of eye contact, and if they just seem really nervous in general. Those are some of the big warning signs that that the state and local government have tried to emphasize to look out for.
Okay. What can someone do to help a victim of human trafficking?
So there's several hotlines that you can call. There is Human Trafficking Hotline, which is a national hotline. And then there's also, Fairfax County Police, and you can notify them if you see any activities or suspicious activity going on in your neighborhood. I would suggest you immediately contact them. And then, as I said, there's been programs that have been implemented to, combat human trafficking directly. So definitely make sure you do your research in terms of looking for these programs, looking for these hotlines and various numbers, as well as resources to help these victims.
Okay, speaking of resources, I know you guys have an organization, the Freedom Connection. What does this organization represent, and how can people reach you?
The Freedom Connection Against Human Trafficking is an organization that Isaiah and myself started with the help of Dr. Al Fuertes, who is a very prominent professor at George Mason University. People can like our page on Facebook, and they can listen to some of the things that we have to say about not just sex trafficking and labor trafficking, but many other various types of human trafficking, such as organ trafficking, begging, and many other things like that. People can get involved by following us, and if they're Mason students, then a great way to learn more about human trafficking and to get involved is to take Al Fuertes' class about human trafficking, NCLC 475.
Okay, great. Will you guys host any events on campus to raise awareness of human
Certainly. We will be doing kiosks. We are actually attempting to partner with Centerville Research Learning Center, or Labor Center rather, my apologies, and having victims of human trafficking come and share their narratives and sort of like a my story, and kind of getting that whole idea that it does exist and trying to raise awareness for it as well. We also want to do, with our kiosks, we want to make them really interactive. With that being said, so having people secure facts about it and really questioning, why is it going on? What can I do to help it and prevent it in my area? Additionally, we want to perform different facilitations, like large-scale presentations. So, for instance, stuff in JC, utilizing the stage there, and potentially having facilitations on a large scale. So, like my stories, like a information sharing session, like a question, like a panel board, something of that nature, and really generating some following.
Wonderful. If you are in the George Mason University community, definitely follow the Freedom Connection on Facebook. Contact Isaiah or Dan. Thanks Isaiah and Dan for being on the show. We really appreciate it. That's all for this show on human trafficking. Tune into our new show every Tuesday night at 11.